Mexico. We should go to Mexico.
When I think of Mexico, the first thing that comes to my mind is the delicious tacos, and I'm sure that it's the case for you as well, right? But did you know that Mexico's history is the one that will tell you all you need to know about the Mesoamericans? And there are some other pretty mind-blowing things in Mexico that not many people know about, like a flower that looks like hands, the longest underwater cave system, and even a tower full of skeletons. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's true. Mexico is full of surprises. Let's take a look at some of them. Number 1. The temple that holds the secrets of Teotihuacan time. First off is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in Teotihuacan, which is in modern-day central Mexico. And this isn't your average temple. No, it's the third largest pyramid in Teotihuacan and also one of the oldest structures in the area. Dating back to 150 and 200 CE, this pyramid was hiding the remains of about 200 sacrificial victims. But that's not even the best part. The temple is tied to the calendar, and mind you, it was just the 2nd century when it was built. There are about 260 carved serpent heads around it, each with an open mouth big enough to hold a marker. Experts think they used to move these markers around to keep track of ritual days in their calendars. But truly, what is under the temple is astonishing. In 2003, 2 archaeologists, Sergio Gomez Chavez and Julie Gazzola, who were with the National Institute of Anthropology and History, found a secret tunnel under this very temple. How? Well, it all started with a heavy rainstorm that caused a 3-foot-wide sinkhole to form near the temple's base. Chavez decided to investigate, and with a flashlight and a rope tied around his waist, he was lowered into the darkness. What he found down there was a perfectly cylindrical tunnel blocked by massive stones. But it wasn't until 6 years later, in 2009, that they got permission to start digging. With the help of a radar and a team of archaeologists, they mapped out the tunnel and its chambers. Eventually, they found the entrance to the tunnel, which had been sealed with large boulders almost 2,000 years ago. The tunnel was filled with all sorts of treasures: seashells, jaguar bones, pottery, and even human figurines. But the most questionable discovery was hundreds of metallic spheres covered in a yellow substance formed by pyrite oxidation. At the end of the tunnel was a chamber filled with miniature mountains, pools of liquid mercury, and greenstone statues, much like an underworld. Pretty weird, right? Well, regardless, by 2015, they had discovered and analyzed over 75,000 artifacts. Moving on, number 2, the largest underwater cave system. In 2018, researchers from the Great Maya Aquifer Project found out that Sac Actun, a massive underwater cave system, was connected to the nearby Dos Ojos system. This connection transformed everything because it meant that Sac Actun was now the longest underwater cave system on the planet, about 347 kilometers long. But it's not just the size that's mind-blowing. Inside this network of caves, they also found evidence of extinct animals, early human settlements, and artifacts from the Maya civilization. They also found walls, passages, altars, and even a cemetery with human remains and ceramic offerings. And let's not forget, archaeologists even found pieces of a Mayan censer, which was used for burning incense during religious ceremonies. All these artifacts have made the experts think that Sac Actun might have been a really important spot for Maya traders back in the day. Merchants traveling from the Caribbean coast would stop by here during the post-classic period between 900 and 1200 AD and probably built altars and special places for rituals all along the cave system. That's not all. There were even bone fragments dating back way before the Maya even existed. And what's the big deal about it? Well, these could be some of the earliest signs of humans living in the Americas, like even before 4,000 years ago. Number 3, the Tower of Skulls. In 2015, during the restoration of a building in the Mexico City, the National Institute of Anthropology and History found the Aztec Tower of Skulls. Built in stages between 1486 and 1502 AD during the reign of Aztec King Ahuizotl, it was one of 7 similar skull towers in Tenochtitlan, the ancient capital of the Aztec Empire. The tower is believed to be part of the Huitzompantli, which was a massive display of skulls that made the Spanish conquistadors shiver in fear during their capture of the city under Hernan Cortés. Not to mention, the tower matched descriptions from Spanish accounts like that of Andrés de Tapia, who documented tens of thousands of skulls at what became known as the Hui Tzompantli. So far, archaeologists have found about 676 skulls, with the number expected to rise as the dig continues. The thing is, experts were expecting to find mostly young men, as they would likely be warriors. But they even found women and children, which left them with a lot more questions. So what were the women and children doing there? Well, for Aztecs and other Mesoamerican cultures, human sacrifice was a ritualistic offering to the sun, seen as a necessity for keeping the gods alive and maintaining cosmic balance. This is why, since this tower is also located near a sacred Aztec temple, there's a huge possibility that these skulls were offerings to the gods, particularly the sun god Huitzilopochtli. Number 4. The world's largest pyramid in ancient Mexico. The Great Pyramid of Cholula, or as locals may know it, Tlaquehualtepetl, is a pyramid that, unlike others, was hidden under a hill crowned by a church and also happens to be the largest pyramid by volume in the world. Construction of this pyramid began over 1,000 years ago, around the 3rd century BCE, and continued for centuries until the 9th century CE. The first phase, called La Conejera, dates back to around 200 BC. Then came the time of the painted skulls, between AD 200 and 350, with 7 stepped levels and an altar decorated with sculpted skulls. Finally, there's the 9 stories with stairways and a jaguar altar built over earlier phases. Excavations of the Great Pyramid have revealed over 400 human burials, mostly from the post-classic period, which means, obviously, sacrifice to the gods. Fun fact, Cholula at its peak had an estimated population of 100,000 people, making it the 2nd largest in Mexico. But as time passed, the city's population declined, and the Great Pyramid was eventually abandoned in the 8th or 9th century AD. Number 5. The tree that has little hands. Then we have the Árbol de Manitas, or the little hands tree, found in Mexico. What's so special about it? These flowers actually look like tiny hands, so obviously that's where the name comes from. How was it found? Back in 1803, 2 adventurers, Alexander von Humboldt and Aimé Bonpland, found it. Legend has it that when Humboldt described what he saw in Mexico, he named this tree as one of the region's 3 wonders. The indigenous Nahuas had their own name for it, Esmaitl, which means bleeding hand. People in Mexico use them to make tea in the leaves. Well, they're perfect for wrapping up tasty tamales. Not to mention, people have been using the flowers of this tree for centuries in traditional Mexican medicine. From tackling nervousness to epilepsy, headaches to insomnia, and even depression, it's been like a natural pharmacy for ages. Talk about all-in-one. Oh, and like all the amazing things are, this tree was also declared endangered back in the 80s. But thanks to some bats who love to pollinate, it's making a comeback in different parts of Mexico. Number 6. The Museum of Mummies. In 1969, a pretty strange place in Mexico was transformed into a museum known as El Museo de las Momias, or to put it simply, the Museum of the Mummies. In 2007, the museum displayed 59 mummies out of a total collection of 111. But what was the collection even from? Let me tell you, but I'm warning you, it gets pretty heartbreaking. During the cholera pandemic from 1829 to 1851, more cemeteries had to be opened to cope with the rising death toll. Some bodies were buried in a rush to control the disease, leading to terrifying facial expressions. And then they introduced a law in Guanajuato that required families to pay a burial tax to keep their loved ones buried forever. Legend has it that some may have been buried alive by accident, like Ignacia Aguilar, whose heart seemed to stop for days due to illness. When her body was found, she was found facing down, biting her arm, with blood in her mouth. Anyways, if the families couldn't pay up, the bodies were removed and stored above ground. People began paying to see these naturally mummified bodies in the late 1800s. The burial tax law was eventually scrapped in 1958. But by then, the museum had become a horrific attraction. The museum's history dates back to 1865, when the first mummy, Dr. Remigio Leroy, was put on display. Today, the museum holds at least 108 corpses, with some mummies wearing the clothes they were buried in. Among them is the world's smallest mummy, a fetus from a pregnant woman who fell victim to cholera. It's something that will leave you with a wrenched heart when you see it, isn't it? Number 7. The Stone of the Five Eras. Next up, we have a huge stone. Seriously, a stone? What's special about it? Well, for this one, it's the way it was carved. The Aztec Sun Stone, or the Stone of the Five Eras, was crafted around 1500 CE. And it's not something you can just pick up. It's like 12 feet in diameter and weighs over 54,000 pounds. At its center is the sun god, Tonatiuh, surrounded by 4 squares representing past eras or suns. But this artifact wasn't just sitting out in the open, waiting to be discovered. Nope, it was buried beneath the Mexico City Cathedral for decades after the Spanish conquest, only to be revealed during repairs in 1790. Since human sacrifices were a big deal for Aztecs, it's likely that the sunstone might have been used as an altar for these rituals, with priests using its symbols to pick the perfect day for sacrifice. Yeah, I know, there's a lot of mention of the human sacrifice, but it's truly one of the most important parts of these ancient civilizations. Number 8. The Tomb of a Great King. Up next in the wonders of Mexico is the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal Brauran, also known as Pakal the Great. His tomb was closed off by a stone slab with stone plugs in the holes. But in 1948, Alberto Ruz-Luillier figured out how to open it. It took 4 years to clear the rubble from the stairway leading down to the tomb, and bam, in 1952, they finally found it. Pakal's skeletal remains were in his sarcophagus, and he was wearing a jade mask and bead necklaces. He was surrounded by sculptures and stucco reliefs that showed his transition to divinity and other figures from Maya mythology. But guess what's the most famous part of this tomb? The extremely carved stone sarcophagus lid that shows him descending into the underworld, where Pakal is resting on the open jaws of a serpent. Even the rest of the sarcophagus is covered in other types of carvings and hieroglyphic inscriptions detailing Pakal's life and achievements. Pakal's tomb and the Temple of the Inscriptions were designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987. But who even was this guy? He was a ruler of the Maya city-state of Palenque in the late classic period of pre-Columbian Mesoamerican history, and acceded to the throne in July 615 and ruled until his death, and ruled for like 68 years, making him one of the longest reigning monarchs in history. Number 9. An intact dinosaur tail. Mexican paleontologists discovered a full dinosaur tail. The fossil was buried in the desert region of Coahuila, and the best part, it's the first intact dinosaur tail of this size to be found in Mexico. There are only a few others like it in the world. This massive, well-preserved tail is about 16 feet long and has 50 vertebrae. It belonged to a duck-billed dino called a hadrosaur, which roamed the Earth about 72 million years ago. These guys could grow up to 40 feet long, so this tail was almost half the length of its body. Locals found it back in 2012, and then a team of experts started digging up more bones from the same dinosaur. Number 10. The island that's the nightmare of someone with a fear of dolls. The next unusual place is the Island of the Dolls, or as the locals call it, La Isla de las Muñecas, located in Xochimilco, just south of Mexico City. The island was once the home of a reclusive man named Don Julian Santana Barrera. Today, it's a hotspot for those drawn to the darker side of tourism. So, how did all these dolls end up here? Well, back in the mid-20th century, Barrera started collecting dolls and hanging them around his small island. According to legend, Barrera found the body of a young girl in the canal. The next day, he saw a doll floating in the water and hung it in a tree to honor her spirit and ward off evil. Some say he found another doll the following day, and he kept collecting dolls to appease the girl's restless spirit. Though there's no proof the girl ever existed, the story survives. In 2001, Barrera's nephew joined him on the island. One day, while they were fishing, Barrera claimed that mermaids in the canal were calling him. When his nephew returned after a brief absence, he found Barrera dead, face down in the water, exactly where the girl supposedly drowned. Since then, visitors have reported strange happenings. Dolls moving their heads and arms, eyes opening and closing, and whispers echoing through the island. People even leave offerings around the dolls, hoping for miracles or blessings. Some change the dolls' clothes and treat the island with a kind of respect. Number 11. The Zone of Silence. I'm sure you've never heard of this one, the Zone of Silence, or the Mapimi Silent Zone. This desert area in northern Mexico is quite well known for strange events like when radio signals go haywire and compasses spin uncontrollably. And that's not even the end of it. 2 meteorites fell on the same ranch in 1938 and 1954. Another one landed in the Allende Valley, just west of the zone, in 1969. Throughout the 20th century, stories about the zone have been pretty wild. People talk about seeing strange creatures, unusual lights in the sky, and even tons of meteor showers. Some swear they've seen these tall blonde characters who come to you speaking perfect Spanish, asking for a drink, and then poof, they vanish into thin air. They call them the Nordics. What about the name of the place itself? In 1966, when Augusto Harry de la Peña had some radio trouble while exploring the area, he gave it this name. Then, in 1970, things really hit the fan when a rocket went off course and landed in the middle of the zone. Literally, no remains of it have been found in the area. And the weirdness doesn't stop there. Back in the 1930s, a pilot named Francisco Sarabia said his radio malfunctioned while flying over the zone. And even though it's a desert, you'll find fossilized seashells and massive salt deposits here too. Some blame it on underground stuff like magnetite and leftover bits from meteorites. Others say it's all thanks to the zone's history as part of the ancient Sea of Thetis, explaining those fossilized seashells and massive salt deposits. But hey, not everyone's buying the scientific explanations. Some think there's something out of this world going on here. Aliens, maybe? Who knows? Maybe the Mexican government. Number 12, the Pink Lakes. Then we have the Las Coloradas, where the lakes are as pink as a flamingo. But why are they pink of all colors? You see, the pink hue of the lakes isn't some magic trick. It's all thanks to these tiny creatures called brine shrimp, or Artemia salina, if you want to get fancy. These little guys have a lot of a red pigment called carotenoid, and when they soak up enough sunlight, the water turns a vibrant shade of pink. But here's something you didn't know. The Mayan have been scooping up salt from these lakes and shipping it all over the place, from Chichen Itza to Tikal in Guatemala. And the best part is that the brine shrimp, stay pretty much the same for like million of years. Las Coloradas has seen some changes over the years. So while it's usually rocking that pretty pink hue, sometimes it can play hard to get. Depending on the time of day and the weather, the shade of pink can go from bold and bright to barely there. Regardless, now you can't dip your toes in the water, let alone take a swim, because all of these lakes are private properties now. Number 13. The animal that looks like a fusion of 3 other species. Then we have the cacomissile, which looks like someone mashed a monkey, a cat, and a raccoon in a bowl. And the outcome was this guy. It has a dark brown and gray fur with a black and white striped tail. And while it may look like a cat, it's actually part of the raccoon family, with some serious tree-climbing skills to show off. This little mammal is a night owl, spending its evenings exploring the treetops and feasting on a bunch of different plants and animals. As part of the raccoon family, it's closely related to its North American cousin, the ringtail. So why am I even talking about a random animal? Well, because of the fact that I'm about to tell you. It's the way they communicate. Is it through some weird sounds? A scratch or two? Rubbing their cheeks? Nope, nope, and nope. They've got these special anal glands that produce a pretty strong liquid. And guess what? They don't just keep it to themselves. Nope, they mix it with their feces and leave it behind as a territorial signpost. That smelly secretion is like a secret message that carries info about the cacomissile's gender, whether it's ready to reproduce, and even its own unique identity. They've got 4 different ways to make their scent known, including peeing, rubbing their cheeks, using those special anal glands, and of course, leaving their scented poop behind. Quite a different little guy. Number 14, the devil's flower mantis. Next on the list is devil's flower mantis, also known by its scientific name, Idolomantis diabolica. First off, you can't miss them with those striking colors: olive green, bright yellow, or creamish white on top, with a fiery red or orange bottom half and legs. And those bulging red or yellow eyes, they give them an alien's vibe for sure. Despite their devilish name, these insects are pretty harmless to humans. These mantises live life in the fast lane, with a lifespan of around 12 months. Females can grow up to 5 inches long, while males are a bit smaller at around 4 inches. Out in the wild, you'll find them chilling in tropical regions, usually hanging out in trees. They use those vibrant wings not just to show off, but to sneak up on their prey by pulling off a surprise attack. And they're masters of disguise. They've evolved to look like a withered leaf, complete with front legs that mimic flower petals. Plus, they've got some slick moves, swaying back and forth like a flower in the breeze to fool unsuspecting victims. But when push comes to shove, these mantises aren't afraid to throw down. They've got a killer threat display, spreading their wings to reveal those bright colors and make themselves look bigger and badder than they really are. Number 15. The Ruined City, which is now a wonder of the world. Best for the last, we have Chichen Itza, an ancient Maya city in the Yucatan state of Mexico. Oh, and it's also one of the world's new 7 wonders. Not to mention, it was also designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1988. Why? Well, not only is it spread across 4 square miles, but it's a historic site, believed to have once been a city filled with religious ceremonies, military operations, politics, and trade, with a peak population of around 35,000. This city was established in 550 CE, but it was located where it was probably because it provided easy access to water sources by caves and sinkholes, known as cenotes, in the limestone landscape. These natural wonders not only maintained the city, but also gave it its name, Chichen Itza, meaning at the mouth of the well of the Itza. It's believed that the Maya people of the Yucatan Peninsula set the stage for the birth of Chichen Itza. These folks had been settling in the area since way back in the pre-classic period, roughly around 1500 BCE to 300 CE. The city's early structures were in a style known as puk, a bit different from what you'd see down in the southern lowlands. You've got buildings like the Akabtzib, or House of the Dark Writing, the Chichanchob, aka the Red House, and the Iglesia, which is, well, the church. Plus there's the Casa de las Monjas, or the nunnery, and the observatory known as El Caracol, which means the snail. Fast forward to the 10th century, and after the southern Maya cities hit a rough patch, Chichen Itza gets a visit from some outsiders, likely Maya inhabitants who've been hanging out with the Toltec people from central Mexico. One theory suggests that these newcomers might have been the Itza, the site's namesake, although some think they might have shown up a couple hundred years later. Anyway, slowly, the jungle slowly took over Chichen Itza. That was until archaeologists started digging around in the 19th century and discovered this hidden gem. So did they find anything about how the people lived there? Well, yes. Like I said, there was a cenote in this ancient city which was believed to be a sacred gateway to the rain god, Chak. And what happened there? Well, according to the stories, unfortunate souls were sacrificed to Chak and tossed into the depths of the cenote along with precious offerings like gold, jade, and other treasures. In 1904, Edward Herbert Thompson decided to do a spot of dredging in the cenote, and guess what he found? Yup, you guessed it, skeletons and sacrificial goodies, confirming the legend. Thanks for tuning in to today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button below for more content like this. Also, remember to turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.